At 7:13 every night, the dog came back to track 12 and waited for a dead man. The rain starts just before dusk, thin at first, drifting sideways through the yellow station lights like cigarette smoke over old glass. Grand Central Terminal in New York is loud tonight. Wet boots, train brakes screaming against steel, coffee cups dropping into bins, hundreds of people moving shoulder to shoulder beneath umbrellas, coats, tired eyes. And right there in the middle of it all, beside track 12, the German Shepherd does not move. Not even once. His fur hangs heavy from the rain. Black and gold turned dark beneath the cold light. Water drips from the edge of his ears. His ribs show faintly beneath his soaked coat. But it's the eyes that stop people for half a second before they keep walking. Not angry, not wild, just empty in the sort of way that makes decent people uncomfortable. A little girl tugs her mom's sleeve and points at him. The mother pulls her closer and whispers something before disappearing into the crowd. A station worker walks past carrying a mop bucket and avoids looking directly at the dog. Two teenagers film him for a few seconds, then laugh awkwardly and leave when he doesn't react. The shepherd stays exactly where he is, staring toward the tracks as another train rolls through the station. He looks like a statue somebody forgot to take home. 40 minutes pass, then another 20. The temperature drops to around 52 degrees. Rainwater gathers beneath the dog's paws. Still he doesn't move. Until a man in a dark brown jacket steps off the late train from New Haven and slows down mid-stride. Ethan Walker notices the dog because soldiers notice things other people train themselves to ignore. The limp in the back leg. The way the ears twitch at every arriving train. The dried mud caked around the paws. And most of all, the waiting. Ethan stands still while commuters brush around him like river water around stone. Tall, mid-30s. Short sandy hair damp from the weather. Right forearm covered in faded ink. A German Shepherd tattoo wrapping around old military scars. He should keep walking. Everyone else does. But then the dog finally lifts his head. Their eyes meet across a few yards of wet concrete. And something inside Ethan tightens hard enough to hurt. Because those eyes don't belong to an aggressive animal. They belong to someone who's been left behind. The station speakers crackle overhead announcing delayed services toward Stamford. Nobody notices the moment Ethan changes direction. He walks slowly toward the shepherd, boots splashing through shallow puddles. "Easy, buddy," he says quietly. The dog doesn't growl, doesn't bare teeth, doesn't back away. He only trembles once, barely visible beneath the rain. Ethan crouches carefully a yard away. Up close, the smell hits him first. Wet fur, rust, infection, and underneath it all, that cold scent animals carry when they've spent too many nights outside alone. The shepherd's paws are raw, one nail split nearly to the base. There's an old leather collar around his neck, cracked from weather and age. Ethan reaches out slowly. The dog flinches at the movement, but never takes his eyes off the tracks. Like he's terrified that if he looks away for even 1 second, he'll miss someone coming back. "Jesus," Ethan whispers. Behind him, a passing man shakes his head. "Don't touch it, buddy. That dog's been sitting there for weeks." Ethan looks up sharply. "Weeks? Swear on my life," the man says. "Every afternoon. Same spot. Barely moves." Transit police and animal control tried twice, but he disappears before they can get close. Then he disappears into the station crowd before Ethan can ask another question. "Weeks." Ethan stares back at the shepherd. Rain slides down the dog's muzzle in thin streams. Another train arrives screaming into the platform. For the first time, the shepherd's body stiffens. His ears rise. His breathing quickens slightly. Hope. Real hope. Ethan turns and watches passengers pour out onto the platform one after another. Businessmen. College students. Tired moms. Backpackers dragging suitcases through puddles. The dog searches every face. Every single one. Until the crowd thins. Until the doors close again. Until the train pulls away into the wet darkness beyond the station lights. And just like that, the hope leaves his eyes. The shepherd lowers his head slowly back toward the ground. Like this disappointment is something he's practiced surviving over and over again. Ethan stays crouched beside the shepherd long after the train disappears into the rain. Most people would have walked away by now. Maybe they would have felt sorry for the dog for a second. Maybe guilty. But guilt fades quickly when people have somewhere warm to be. The station slowly empties as night settles deeper across the city. The smell of wet concrete thickens in the cold air. Somewhere farther down the platform, a cleaner drags a hose across the tiles while distant announcements echo through nearly empty corridors. The shepherd still watches the tracks. Waiting. Ethan glances at the old leather collar again. Cracked edges. Rusted buckle. The kind of collar that had once been expensive before weather and time stripped the life out of it. He moves carefully, slow enough not to startle the dog, and slides 2 fingers beneath the wet leather. The shepherd stiffens immediately. Not aggressive. Afraid. Like he has learned that hands usually mean pain or being pushed away. Easy, buddy, Ethan murmurs softly. I am not going to hurt you. For a second, the dog closes his eyes. Just 1 second. But it is enough for Ethan to notice how exhausted he really is. The trembling is worse up close. Tiny shivers running through the ribs beneath the soaked fur. Cold. Starving. Running on instinct alone. Ethan turns the collar slightly and sees something scratched into the inside leather. Faded letters nearly worn away by rain. He leans closer beneath the station light. Wait until I come back. Ethan stares at the words without breathing. Not a dog tag. Not a name. Not a phone number. Just a promise. Behind him, footsteps approach. An older station worker carrying a takeout coffee slows beside them. Still here, is he? The man says quietly. Ethan looks up. You have seen him before? Every day for nearly a month. The worker shakes his head sadly. Comes in around the same time every afternoon. Sits right there near track 12. Watches every train. He points toward the tracks. Then leaves sometime after midnight. Ethan looks back at the shepherd. Where does he go? Nobody knows. The old man takes a sip of coffee. Funny thing is, he never bothers anyone. Never barks. Never chases food. Just waits. The shepherd suddenly lifts his head again as lights appear down the tunnel. Another train arriving. Ethan watches the change happen instantly. The dog straightens despite the pain in his legs. Ears twitching. Eyes alive again. Hope flooding back into him so hard it almost looks painful. The train screeches into the station. Doors slide open. Passengers spill out laughing, tired, distracted, staring at phones. The shepherd studies every single face. Desperately. Ethan has seen soldiers scan crowds like that before. Men searching airports after deployment. Wives searching hospital corridors. People trying to find someone they love before fear finds them first. But this is worse somehow. Because the dog still believes. Even after all this time. A young man carrying a surfboard bag nearly bumps into the shepherd and curses under his breath. The dog does not react. A woman drops part of her sandwich near the platform edge. The shepherd ignores it completely. His eyes remain fixed on the crowd moving past him in waves. Searching. Waiting. Then slowly, one by one, the passengers disappear up the escalators. The platform empties again. And Ethan watches the exact moment the shepherd understands. Nobody came back tonight either. The dog lowers himself carefully onto the wet concrete for the first time since Ethan arrived. One front paw curls awkwardly beneath him. Injured. Ethan notices fresh blood mixing with rainwater near the claws. Hell, buddy, he whispers. He reaches into his jacket pocket and pulls out half a chicken sandwich wrapped in paper from the train ride. Slowly, he unwraps it and places it on the ground a few inches away. The shepherd does not even look at it. That unsettles Ethan more than anything else tonight. Hunger always wins eventually. But grief can do strange things to living creatures. Ethan waits silently beside him while cold wind rolls through the open station. Somewhere above them, thunder rumbles faintly over the harbor. You waiting for your owner? Ethan asks quietly. After a while, the shepherd blinks once toward the tracks. Or maybe your buddy. The dog's ears twitch slightly at the word buddy. Ethan feels something shift painfully in his chest. Memories he spends years trying not to touch begin moving beneath the surface again. His younger brother Liam sitting beside him on a jetty near New Haven years ago, laughing with salt water in his hair, promising he would be back before Christmas. Promises are dangerous things, Ethan thinks. Especially the ones people believe. The shepherd suddenly tries to stand again, but stumbles hard before catching himself. Ethan reacts instantly, reaching forward to steady him by the shoulder. The dog freezes beneath his hand, completely still. Their eyes meet again under the station lights. And for the first time all night, the shepherd finally looks directly at Ethan instead of the tracks. Up close, his eyes are amber brown streaked with exhaustion. But beneath the fear and hunger, Ethan sees something else there. Recognition. Not of him exactly, but of kindness. Like the dog remembers what it felt like once. The shepherd leans very slightly into Ethan's hand before catching himself and pulling away again. It lasts less than a second, but it hits Ethan harder than expected, because broken things usually do not trust anyone. Not this quickly. Ethan exhales slowly and glances toward the city exit, where taxis wait beneath glowing streetlights. He should leave. He has an early shift tomorrow at the repair shop at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. His apartment is 40 minutes away. His life has enough ghosts already. But the shepherd beside him keeps staring toward the tracks with those tired eyes that refuse to give up on someone who might never return. And Ethan suddenly realizes something deeply human about the animal sitting beside him in the rain. The dog is not waiting because he is trained to. He is waiting because love has made him loyal long after logic should have told him to stop. By 9:30, the rain finally eases into a cold mist drifting through the station arches, but the chill settles deeper into the concrete, like winter crawling into old bones. Ethan sits beside the shepherd now. Instead of crouching, one knee raised, forearms resting against it. The sort of tired silence only strangers can share. Around them, the station has changed shape completely. The crowds are gone. Shops behind the platforms begin pulling down metal shutters one by one. Fluorescent lights hum overhead. Somewhere nearby, somebody burns coffee beans too long, and the bitter smell hangs in the damp air. The shepherd still watches every arriving train, still searching faces, still believing. Ethan cannot stop thinking about the words inside the collar. Wait until I come back. Not leave him here. Not stay. Wait. It sounds temporary. Like whoever owned this dog truly meant to return. That thought unsettles him more than abandonment ever could. Because if somebody loved this animal enough to leave a promise behind, what stopped them from keeping it? The shepherd suddenly shifts beside him with a soft grunt of pain. Ethan notices how stiff the back leg has become. The dog is trying hard not to show weakness, but every movement costs him now. You are in rough shape, buddy, Ethan murmurs quietly. He reaches toward the sandwich still untouched near the dog's paw and tears off a smaller piece. This time he holds it gently between his fingers instead of leaving it on the ground. Come on. The shepherd stares at the food for several long seconds. Ethan almost thinks he will refuse again. Then finally, slowly, the dog leans forward and takes the piece with extraordinary care, lips trembling slightly against Ethan's hand. No snapping, no desperation, just caution, as if he has forgotten whether he is allowed to trust kindness anymore. Ethan exhales softly through his nose. There you go. The shepherd chews slowly, eyes never fully leaving the tracks. Another small piece. Then another. Tiny bites only. Like eating hurts. Ethan notices the dog's body relaxing by inches each time their hands touch. Rainwater still drips from the shepherd's coat onto the concrete beneath them, but some invisible wall inside the animal has started cracking open. A security guard approaches from farther down the platform, heavy boots echoing through the quiet station. He looks tired more than annoyed. Buddy, animal control truck is meant to come tomorrow for that dog, he says carefully. You should not get too attached. Ethan glances up. What happens if they take him? The guard shrugs uneasily. Depends whether he is chipped. Depends if somebody claims him. The unfinished part hangs between them anyway. Ethan has heard enough stories to know where abandoned dogs usually end up. The shepherd notices the stranger's voice and presses slightly closer to Ethan without realizing it. Tiny movement. Barely there. But enough. The security guard sees it too and sighs. Poor thing picked you, did he? Ethan scratches lightly behind the dog's ear for the first time. The shepherd freezes again beneath the touch. Not from fear this time. From memory. Ethan feels it instantly. Some people do not understand that animals remember love in physical ways. Through routines. Through voices. Through hands that once made them feel safe. The shepherd closes his eyes briefly while Ethan's fingers rest against damp fur. It lasts only a moment before the dog pulls back and resumes staring toward the rails. Like he feels guilty for relaxing. What time does he usually leave? Ethan asks the guard. Near midnight mostly. And comes back every day? Like clockwork. The guard shakes his head slowly. Honestly, buddy, it is creepy after a while. Dog acts like somebody promised him something. Ethan looks down at the collar again. Somebody did. A cold wind blows through the platform. carrying the distant smell of salt water from the harbor. The shepherd suddenly lifts his head sharply toward the station entrance. His ears rise, body tense again, hope flooding through him so quickly it almost hurts to watch. Ethan turns instinctively. A tall man in a dark green coat limps through the station doors, dragging an old duffel bag behind him. Beard, gray hair, thin frame. The shepherd stands immediately despite the pain in his legs. Ethan sees it happen in real time. The trembling anticipation. The desperate belief. The dog takes one step forward, then another. His tail moves once. Very small, almost afraid to hope too much. The old man continues toward track 12 without noticing them. The shepherd's breathing quickens. Ethan can hear it now. Tiny sharp breaths. Then the man finally comes close enough for the dog to see his face clearly beneath the station lights. And everything inside the shepherd collapses. The tail stops moving instantly. His ears lower. The hope disappears so fast, it leaves something hollow behind. The dog slowly backs away 2 steps and sits again beside Ethan without making a sound. That silence breaks Ethan's heart more than crying ever could. Because disappointment this deep has happened too many times before. The old man walks past completely unaware that somewhere beside him, a dog just survived another heartbreak. Ethan stares down at the shepherd. You really thought it was him, did you? The dog lowers his head slightly onto his injured paw. Exhausted, Ethan feels anger rising unexpectedly in his chest now. Not toward the dog. Toward whoever left him carrying this kind of loyalty alone. Listen to me, Ethan says softly after a while. Nobody should have to wait forever. The shepherd blinks slowly but keeps watching the tracks. Ethan rubs a hand across his jaw and glances toward the station clock overhead. 10:17 at night. The last ferry home will leave Lower Manhattan Ferry Terminal soon. If he misses it, he will need to catch buses halfway across the city. He should stand up now. Walk away before this becomes his problem. Instead, he reaches carefully toward the old leather collar again, turning it slightly beneath the station light. That is when he notices something hidden beneath the rusted buckle. A tiny stitched flap, almost impossible to see unless you were close enough to touch it. Ethan frowns and gently slips a finger underneath the damp leather. The shepherd watches him closely but does not pull away this time. Inside the hidden flap is something folded tightly against the collar to protect it from rain. Ethan carefully slides it free with trembling fingers. A photograph. Small, water-damaged, worn nearly white at the edges. He stares at the image beneath the station light while the shepherd watches him in complete silence. In the photograph, the same German shepherd sits proudly beside a man wearing an old military jacket, both of them smiling toward the camera like they belong to each other completely. And written across the bottom in faded blue ink are 4 words that make Ethan's chest tighten instantly. Find me if you waits. The photograph trembles slightly in Ethan's fingers while station lights flicker across the water damage. The man beside the shepherd looks older than 50, maybe 60, weathered by sun and hard years. Gray beard, deep lines around the eyes. But despite the worn military jacket and tired face, there is warmth in the picture. Real warmth. The kind that only appears when somebody is looking at family. The shepherd in the photo sits pressed against the man's leg, ears high, eyes alive, proud in the uncomplicated way dogs love people with their whole souls. Ethan studies the faded handwriting again. Find me if he waits. Not if he survives. Not if he gets lost. If he waits. The words settle heavily into Ethan's chest. Because whoever wrote them already knew exactly what this dog would do. The shepherd watches Ethan carefully now, amber eyes following every tiny movement of the photograph as if he understands its importance. Maybe he does. Animals remember things people underestimate all the time. Smells. Voices. Promises. Ethan slowly flips the photograph over. Blank except for a faint stamp from an old instant camera company that barely exists anymore. No address. No name. Nothing useful. You really have been waiting all this time, have you? He murmurs softly. The shepherd lowers his head slightly, exhausted but attentive. Somewhere beyond the station walls, thunder rolls again over the city. Midnight feels close now. The station grows quieter with every passing minute, until even footsteps echo strangely through the empty platforms. Ethan slips the photograph carefully into his jacket pocket and glances toward the station clock. 10:43. He should leave now if he wants any chance of getting home before morning. Instead, he hears himself asking a question he already knows the answer to. You want to come with me? The shepherd immediately looks toward the tracks again. Ethan almost laughs quietly at the stubbornness of it. Yeah, thought so. Another cold gust pushes rain mist through the open platform, and this time the shepherd shivers hard enough that Ethan notices his teeth clench slightly against the cold. That decides it, right? Ethan says under his breath while standing slowly. You can hate me later. The shepherd watches him cautiously as Ethan removes his jacket. Underneath, he wears a faded charcoal shirt stretched across broad shoulders marked by years of physical work. The German shepherd tattoo, winding around his right forearm, catches the station light briefly as he kneels again beside the dog. I'm getting you out of the cold first. Ethan drapes the jacket carefully across the shepherd's back. The dog startles slightly, but does not resist. The warmth seems to confuse him more than anything else. Ethan gently touches the injured leg. The shepherd winces immediately. Easy, buddy. I know. He studies the paw more closely now. Cracked pads, torn nail, swollen joint, infection beginning around the edges. Weeks of walking on damaged feet. Yet somehow the dog kept returning here every day. Kept waiting. Ethan shakes his head slowly in disbelief. You are either the most loyal creature in America, he whispers, or the most stubborn. The shepherd gives the faintest movement of his ears at Ethan's voice. Then suddenly, somewhere down the tracks, another train horn sounds in the distance. Instantly the dog tries to stand again despite the pain. Ethan catches him carefully before he collapses. No, the shepherd strains toward the tracks anyway, breathing faster now. Hope again. Endless, impossible hope. Ethan looks toward the approaching headlights emerging from the tunnel. Last regional service heading north. The platform begins filling briefly with a handful of late passengers drifting through the station, carrying backpacks and takeout bags. The shepherd scans every face. Ethan watches him do it and feels something painful twist beneath his ribs. Because he recognizes this kind of waiting. After Liam disappeared 3 years earlier during a storm off the coast near New Haven, Ethan spent 6 straight months checking every unidentified hospital, report in New South Wales, every unknown patient, every emergency call-out, every rumor. Rationally, he knew the ocean almost never gives people back. But grief does not care about logic. Grief survives on tiny, impossible hopes. A movement near the escalators catches the shepherd's attention sharply. A man wearing a Navy military surplus jacket steps onto the platform, carrying a duffel bag over one shoulder. The shepherd freezes completely. Ethan feels it happen through the dog's body like electricity. The man walks closer beneath the overhead lights. Similar build to the photograph. Similar beard. Similar limp. For one impossible second, even Ethan thinks maybe this is him. The shepherd takes a trembling step forward. Then another. His tail moves weakly behind him. Ethan has never seen anything so heartbreakingly hopeful in his life. The man finally notices the dog and slows. Beautiful shepherd, he says casually to Ethan before continuing toward another platform without stopping. That is all. Just another stranger. The shepherd remains standing there long after the man disappears. Slowly, the tiny movement in his tail fades away again. Ethan swears softly beneath his breath. Come here, buddy. This time, when Ethan gently touches the side of his neck, the shepherd leans into him properly for the first time all night. Not much. Just enough for Ethan to feel how exhausted he really is. The dog smells like rainwater, train smoke, and weeks of sleeping outdoors. Beneath Ethan's hand, his heartbeat races too fast. You cannot stay here tonight, Ethan says firmly now. Whatever promise you made, you are no good to anyone dead from cold. The shepherd closes his eyes briefly at the word dead, almost like he understands more than he should. Ethan pulls out his phone and quickly searches nearby emergency veterinary clinics. One in Midtown stays open all night. 15 minutes by car if traffic behaves. He glances toward the station exit, where taxis wait beneath glowing streetlights smeared by rain. All right, he says quietly. We are doing this properly. Ethan stands and moves slowly beside the shepherd. Come on, buddy. For several seconds the dog refuses to move. His eyes remain locked on the tracks behind them. Ethan waits patiently despite the cold biting through his shirt now. I know, he says softly. I know you are scared he will come back while you are gone. The shepherd looks at him again. Something fragile passes between them then. Not trust exactly, but understanding. Ethan crouches one final time until they are eye level beneath the dim station lights. If somebody loved you enough to leave that message, he says quietly, then they would not want you dying alone on a train platform. Silence. The distant hum of trains. Rain tapping softly against metal roofs. Then finally, painfully slowly, the shepherd limps one step toward Ethan instead of the tracks. Just one. But it feels like watching a miracle happen in real time. The shepherd hesitates beside Ethan at the edge of track 12 while cold wind rolls through the station one last time. Behind them, rails hum faintly beneath distant trains disappearing into the dark beyond New York. The dog keeps looking back over his shoulder every few steps, eyes fixed on the tracks like part of him still refuses to leave. Ethan understands that feeling better than he wants to admit. Sometimes people keep returning to painful places because hope hurts less than letting go. Come on, buddy, he says softly. Just tonight. The shepherd limps forward beside him at last. Slow. Careful. Every step uneven on the injured leg. Ethan matches his pace without thinking about it. Together they move through the nearly empty station beneath harsh fluorescent lights and faded travel posters peeling from old walls. A young cleaner pauses mid-mop to stare at them passing by. Maybe because they look strange together. One exhausted man. One broken dog wrapped in a wet brown jacket. Both carrying ghosts they cannot quite put down. Outside the station, rain hangs in the air like cold smoke. Traffic slides through slick streets beneath glowing signs and blurred headlights. New York feels quieter after midnight. Less pretending. Office towers become dark shapes against low clouds while the city exhales its tiredness into the wet night. Taxis line the curb under dripping awnings. Ethan raises a hand toward the first cab, but the moment the driver notices the shepherd, he shakes his head immediately through the window. Sorry, buddy. No dogs. Ethan tries the next one. Same answer. Third cab barely slows down at all. The shepherd stands silently beside him the entire time, soaked for pressed against Ethan's leg. No barking. No fuss. Just quiet acceptance, like rejection is something he already expects from the world. Ethan feels anger rising again. He is injured, he says toward the fourth driver, an older Lebanese man with tired eyes. I will pay extra for cleaning. The driver studies the shepherd for a long moment. Then his expression softens slightly. Big dog. Gentle though. The driver sighs. All right, but he sits on the floor. Thank you. Ethan opens the back door carefully. The shepherd freezes. Inside the taxi, warm air smells faintly of eucalyptus air freshener and takeout chips. The dog stares at the dark interior suspiciously, uncertain whether he belongs there. Ethan crouches beside him in the rain. You are safe. For a second, nothing happens. Then slowly, painfully, the shepherd climbs inside. Ethan notices how hard it is for him to lift the injured leg. The movement costs him nearly all his strength. Once inside, the dog immediately turns toward the rear window, facing the station they are leaving behind. Still watching. Always watching. The taxi pulls away from the curb into wet midnight traffic. Nobody speaks for the first few minutes except the radio murmuring softly up front about weather warnings along the coast. Ethan glances beside him. The shepherd sits perfectly still despite obvious exhaustion. Streetlights slide across his tired face in passing flashes of gold and shadow. What is his name? The driver asks quietly. Ethan looks toward the dog. Do not know yet. The shepherd's ears twitch slightly at the sound of Ethan's voice. Looks like a military working dog, the driver says. My cousin had one in the army years ago. Smart animals. Loyal. Ethan nods faintly. Loyal. The word feels too small somehow. They stop at a red light near Midtown where rainwater glitters across empty sidewalks. The shepherd suddenly shifts upright, staring intensely through the rain-covered window. Ethan follows his gaze. Across the street, a homeless man wrapped in blankets pushes a shopping trolley beneath an awning. Instantly, the shepherd's breathing changes. Faster. Hopeful again. Ethan sees it immediately now. The searching never stops. The dog rises halfway despite the pain in his leg, pressing closer toward the glass. The taxi begins moving before they get a proper look. The shepherd watches the man disappear behind rain and traffic until he is gone completely. Then slowly, silently, he lowers himself back down again. Ethan looks away toward the window, jaw tightening. The driver notices too, but says nothing. Some sadnesses deserve silence more than comfort. 15 minutes later, they pull into the emergency veterinary clinic in Midtown. Bright white lights spill across the wet car park. Ethan pays the fare while the shepherd hesitates again beside the taxi. The clinic doors slide open automatically with a soft mechanical sound. Warm air rushes out carrying the sharp scent of antiseptic and wet fur. Inside, a young veterinary nurse behind the desk looks up from paperwork. The moment she sees the shepherd, her expression changes completely. Oh my God. Ethan kneels beside the dog carefully. Come on, buddy. The shepherd takes 2 slow steps inside before stopping abruptly. His eyes lock onto the clinic entrance behind them. Waiting again. Ethan gently rests a hand against his neck. I know. The nurse walks around the desk slowly, careful not to startle him. What happened to him? Found him at Grand Central. Is he yours? Ethan glances down at the shepherd. Strange question. Because somehow, after only a few hours, the answer feels complicated. Not exactly. The nurse crouches nearby, speaking softly now. Hello, beautiful boy. The shepherd watches her, but does not react aggressively. Only tired. So incredibly tired. Can we scan for a microchip? She asks. Ethan nods. Please. Another nurse appears carrying a scanner, while the first brings water in a metal bowl. The shepherd notices it instantly, but hesitates before drinking, like he still expects permission from somebody. Who is not there? Go on, Ethan whispers. Finally, the dog lowers his head and drinks greedily for several long seconds. Ethan realizes then how dangerously dehydrated he must have been. The scanner passes slowly along the shepherd's neck and shoulders. Silence. Then a soft beep fills the room. The nurses exchange a quick glance. He is chipped, one says. Ethan straightens immediately. Can you pull the details? The nurse types rapidly into the computer while rain taps gently against clinic windows. The shepherd finishes drinking and moves closer to Ethan's side again, pressing damp fur lightly against his leg. Tiny gesture. Instinctive now. The computer screen glows pale blue across the nurse's face as she reads silently. Then her expression shifts. Confused first, then sad. What is it? Ethan asks quietly. She looks up slowly. Registered owner is listed as Daniel Mercer. Ethan repeats the name silently in his head. Daniel Mercer. The man from the photograph. Address. The nurse hesitates. That is the strange part. She turns the screen slightly toward Ethan. Under owner information, most of the details are years out of date. Old phone numbers disconnected. Previous address marked inactive. But one note remains attached beneath the registration file. In capital letters. If found waiting at Central Station, please contact St. Mary's Shelter immediately. Ethan stares at the screen while cold dread slowly crawls into his chest. Because people do not leave instructions like that unless they already know something terrible is coming. The clinic grows quieter after midnight. Phones stop ringing. Rain softens against the windows. Somewhere deeper in the building, another animal whimpers briefly before fading back into silence. Ethan stands beside the reception desk staring at the computer screen while the shepherd presses close against his leg, exhausted enough that his body occasionally sways from fatigue. If found waiting at Central Station, please contact St. Mary's Shelter immediately. The words feel less like instructions and more like the final line of a goodbye letter. Ethan rubs a hand slowly across his jaw. Can you call them now? The nurse checks the clock. Shelter office will be closed, but they might have an emergency number. She starts searching through old registration files while another staff member carefully approaches the shepherd with a lead and blanket. We need to examine his leg properly, she says softly. The shepherd notices the lead immediately and stiffens. His ears lower. Not aggression. Fear. Ethan crouches beside him. Hey, it is all right. The dog keeps staring toward the clinic entrance. Waiting. Ethan gently takes the lead from the nurse instead. Let me. The shepherd watches him closely while Ethan clips the lead onto the old leather collar. The tiny metallic sound echoes strangely loud in the quiet room. Something about it feels important, like the dog has not belonged anywhere for a very long time. Good boy, Ethan murmurs quietly. The shepherd blinks slowly at the words. Maybe nobody has called him that in months. The veterinary nurse guides them down a softly lit corridor smelling of antiseptic and fresh linen. Their footsteps echo faintly against polished floors. Examination room 3 waits at the end beneath pale fluorescent lights. The shepherd hesitates at the doorway. Ethan notices every sign now. The hyper-awareness, the constant scanning, the instinct to locate exits immediately. Military training, he says quietly without thinking. The nurse glances over. You reckon? Ethan nods faintly while helping the dog onto a padded mat. He watches rooms before he enters them, watches people's hands, reacts to movement before sound. The nurse studies the shepherd again with softer eyes now. Poor darling. The shepherd finally lies down with visible effort. The moment his body touches warmth, exhaustion crashes into him all at once. Ethan sees it happen instantly. The dog's eyes droop heavily for the first time since they met. His breathing slows slightly. Safe enough to rest. At least a little. A middle-aged veterinarian enters carrying a tablet and warm towel. Kind face. Silver hair tied back neatly. I am Dr. Harris, she says quietly while kneeling beside the shepherd. And who is this handsome man? Ethan hesitates. The truth is, he still does not know the dog's name. Yet, somehow calling him nameless feels wrong now. I have just been calling him Buddy. Dr. Harris smiles gently. That works for most Australians. She begins examining the injured paw carefully while speaking in a calm voice the entire time. Easy now. You have done enough surviving for one night. The shepherd watches her hands closely but remains still beside Ethan, trusting because Ethan stays near him. The realization lands heavily in Ethan's chest. After only a few hours, the dog already checks for him constantly. Dr. Harris studies the damaged paw with concern. He has been walking on this injury for quite some time. How bad is it? Ethan asks quietly. Infection is starting, but thankfully no major fracture. She gently touches the swollen joint. Mostly exhaustion, dehydration, exposure, and stress. Her voice softens further. Honestly, what worries me more is how long he has been operating in survival mode. Ethan glances down at the shepherd. The dog keeps one eye fixed toward the examination room door even while lying down. Waiting for footsteps. Waiting for someone impossible. He has been sleeping at Grand Central, Ethan says. Dr. Harris pauses. This is the station dog. Ethan blinks. You have heard about him? Half the staff have. She shakes her head sadly. People posted photos online weeks ago. Nobody knew where he came from. Ethan looks surprised. Nobody helped him. Dr. Harris gives him a tired look over the top of her glasses. People filmed him mostly. Silence settles across the room for a moment. Only rain tapping softly outside. The shepherd suddenly lifts his head sharply toward the corridor. Footsteps passing outside the room. His ears rise instantly. Hope again. Ethan watches the dog stare at the door until the footsteps fade away. Then slowly the shepherd lowers his head back onto the blanket. Dr. Harris notices too. He does that often? Every time somebody walks in. He is searching. Ethan nods once. For Daniel Mercer. The veterinarian looks up. Ethan tells her about the photograph. The collar message. The microchip note. While he speaks, the shepherd listens quietly beside him as though he already knows. Every word by heart. Dr. Harris finishes wrapping the injured paw carefully before sitting back slightly. There are animals, she says softly, who bond so deeply with one person that the absence physically changes them. Ethan looks down at the shepherd again. The dog's amber eyes meet his for a brief second before drifting back toward the door. Can they wait this long? He asks. Dr. Harris exhales slowly. Longer than people think. The nurse suddenly reappears holding a cordless phone. I reach someone from St. Mary's shelter. Ethan stands immediately. And older woman named Claire. The nurse lowers her voice. She sounded shocked when I mentioned Grand Central. Ethan takes the phone. Hello. Static crackles softly before an older woman answers with a tired but warm voice. You found him, did you? Ethan glances toward the shepherd. I think so. Silence on the other end. Then very quietly. Is he still waiting? Ethan looks at the dog lying beside the examination table with his eyes fixed stubbornly toward the hallway. Yeah, Ethan says softly. He still is. The woman exhales shakily. Oh, Daniel. Ethan straightens slightly. You knew the owner? Knew him, she repeats sadly. Love, half the shelter knew him. Ethan feels his chest tighten. Where is he now? The silence that follows lasts too long. Rain ticks softly against the clinic windows, while somewhere in the corridor a printer hums quietly to life. Finally, the woman answers. That is the problem, son. Her voice breaks slightly beneath exhaustion and worry. Nobody has seen Daniel Mercer in almost 5 weeks. The words stay hanging in Ethan's ear long after the woman falls silent on the phone. Nobody has seen Daniel Mercer in almost 5 weeks. Beside the examination table, the shepherd slowly lifts his head as though he recognizes the name even through exhaustion. His ears twitch once toward Ethan's voice. Hope again. Always hope. Ethan turns slightly away from the others, lowering his voice instinctively. What happened to him? Rain slides softly down the clinic windows while the older woman exhales shakily on the other end of the line. Daniel used to stay near the shelter. Sometimes when the weather turned bad. Never for long. He hated feeling trapped indoors. Her voice carries the rough warmth of someone who has spent years helping broken people survive one more winter. But he always came back for the dog. Ethan glances toward the shepherd. The dog watches him carefully now, amber eyes tired but alert. What is his name? Ethan asks quietly. The woman pauses. The dog. Yeah. A soft, sad laugh escapes her. Ghost. Ethan looks down slowly at the shepherd beside him. Somehow the name fits immediately. Not because the dog seems frightening. Because he feels like something left behind by another life. Something still wandering through unfinished grief. Daniel found him years ago. Claire continues softly. Out near a training facility outside Fort Bragg. Dog had been retired from military service after an operation overseas. Ethan's eyes narrow slightly. He knew it. The posture. The scanning. The discipline buried beneath exhaustion. What about Daniel? Former Army engineer. Her voice lowers further. Lost his wife a long time ago. Then things slowly fell apart after that. Ethan leans lightly against the wall while listening. No family. Not anymore. Silence crackles through the line for a moment. Truth is, son, those two only really had each other. Ethan looks again at Ghost curled painfully on the blanket beneath fluorescent light. The shepherd's injured paw rests wrapped in fresh bandages now. Safe for the first time in weeks. Yet even here, warm and protected, his eyes keep drifting toward the hallway every time footsteps pass. Waiting for the one person who never came back. Claire speaks again carefully. Daniel disappeared after a storm about a month ago. Ethan's chest tightens. Storm. Big one. Flooding around parts of the city. Ethan remembers it vaguely now. Roads closed. Ferry services canceled. News helicopters circling swollen rivers for days. Ghost turned up at the shelter alone the morning after. Claire says softly. Wet through. Exhausted. Kept pulling toward Grand Central. Ethan closes his eyes briefly. So Daniel told him to wait there. That was their place. Her voice breaks slightly with emotion. Daniel used to say if anything ever separated them, he would find Ghost at Central. The shepherd suddenly struggles to stand at the sound of voices outside the room. Ethan immediately moves beside him. Easy. Ghost limps toward the half-open door anyway, ears raised high. Hope flashing alive once more. A man walks past pushing a trolley stacked with towels. Not Daniel. The hope fades again. Ethan watches the dog lower himself painfully back onto the blanket and feels something inside him crack, quietly open. Claire speaks, gently through the phone. He still does that, does he? Ethan swallows hard before answering. Every time somebody walks by, silence settles between them. Heavy. Human. Then Claire whispers softly, almost to herself, "Oh, sweetheart." Ethan sits beside Ghost on the floor now, one arm resting across his knees. Did anyone search for Daniel properly? Police looked for a few days. Her tone carries no anger, only tired disappointment. But homeless veterans disappear all the time in cities, love. People stop asking questions eventually. Ethan stares at the rain running down the clinic windows in crooked silver lines. Outside, New York glows faintly beneath midnight clouds. Thousands of people sleeping warm in apartments and houses while one old soldier vanished quietly enough that almost nobody noticed. Beside him, Ghost slowly leans against Ethan's shoulder for the first time. Full weight this time. Trusting without meaning to. Ethan freezes slightly at the contact. The shepherd's fur is still damp beneath his fingers, warm now instead of cold. Alive. Claire. Ethan says quietly. Did Daniel have somewhere he usually went besides the shelter? A few places. Paper rustles softly over the phone. There was an old church near Hell's Kitchen he liked. St. Jude's. Sometimes he helped there for meals. She hesitates. and there is a small storage unit near Queens where he kept his things. Ethan's pulse shifts slightly. You have the address? I can text it. Another pause. Are you thinking of looking for him? Ethan glances down at Ghost. The shepherd has finally closed his eyes completely, exhausted enough that sleep is starting to pull him under despite himself. But even asleep, his ears twitch at distant footsteps in the hallway. Still listening. Still waiting. Ethan thinks about the photograph hidden in his jacket pocket. Find me if he waits. Not save him. Not keep him. Find me. Like Daniel knew exactly what Ghost would do after he disappeared. Like he trusted the world to eventually place one decent person in their path. Yeah, Ethan says softly. I think I am. Claire exhales slowly, relief mixing with sadness. Then maybe there is still time. The call ends quietly after she promises to send the addresses. Ethan lowers the phone and sits in silence beside Ghost while the clinic hums softly around them. Dr. Harris enters a few minutes later carrying medication and fresh water. She notices the sleeping shepherd immediately and smiles gently. First proper rest he has probably had in weeks. Ethan nods faintly. Ghost sleeps deeply now, chin resting against Ethan's boot without even realizing it. How long can he stay here? Ethan asks. Overnight at least. She studies him carefully. But emotionally? Ethan looks up. Dr. Harris kneels beside Ghost, lowering her voice instinctively. Dogs like him form attachment around purpose. Right now his entire purpose is waiting. Her eyes meet Ethan's. If Daniel Mercer is gone. She does not finish the sentence. She does not need to. Ethan understands anyway. Some creatures survive terrible things as long as hope keeps breathing inside them. Take that away too suddenly, and sometimes the heart follows it into darkness. Ethan looks down at Ghost sleeping against his boot, while rain whispers softly outside the clinic windows. The shepherd's paws twitch faintly in dreams. Maybe running. Maybe searching crowded train platforms again. Ethan gently rests one hand against the dog's neck. I am going to find him, he whispers quietly into the empty room. Ghost does not wake. But for the first time all night, the tightness around his tired eyes softened slightly. Like somewhere deep inside, a part of him heard the promise. By 3 a.m, the storm finally drifts east toward the coast, leaving New York washed clean and strangely quiet. Beneath low clouds. Inside the clinic, most lights have been dimmed except for the reception desk and emergency rooms farther down the corridor. Ethan sits alone beside Ghost while the shepherd sleeps against his boots on a pile of folded blankets. Every so often, Ghost's paws twitch faintly in dreams. Running somewhere. Searching. Waiting. Ethan cannot sleep. He has never been good at sleeping in places filled with fluorescent lights and silence. Too many memories live in rooms like this. Hospitals. Waiting areas. Nights where nobody says the worst thing out loud because saying it makes it real. He leans back against the wall and stares at the old photograph again beneath the pale light. Daniel Mercer smiling beside Ghost years earlier. 2 survivors holding each other together without even realizing it. Ethan studies Daniel's face carefully now. There is something familiar there beyond the beard and weathered skin. Not appearance. Weariness. The sort carried by men who spend years pretending they're still functioning long after grief has already hollowed them out from the inside. Ethan understands that look too well. His phone buzzes softly around 4:15 in the morning. Claire has sent the addresses. St. Jude's Church in Hell's Kitchen. A storage facility in Queens. And beneath them, one final message. Daniel always carried guilt about leaving people behind. Especially after the army. If Ghost waited, Daniel would try to come back. No matter what condition he was in. Ethan reads the words twice. Then a third time. Ghost stirs slightly beside him as though sensing movement. His tired eyes open halfway before settling immediately on Ethan. The shepherd relaxes the moment he recognizes him there. Ethan notices it instantly now. The dog no longer scans every room first. He checks for Ethan first. Morning, buddy, Ethan whispers softly. Ghost lifts his head slowly from the blankets. For one brief second, confusion crosses his face, like he expects train station lights instead of warm walls and quiet voices. Then memory returns. Waiting. Always waiting. He struggles carefully onto his feet despite the wrapped paw. Ethan kneels immediately. Easy. Ghost. Leans against him slightly for balance this time, without hesitation. Trust growing quietly between them like something alive. Dr. Harris appears moments later carrying 2 takeout coffees and a small bowl of scrambled eggs mixed with chicken. For the patient, she says gently. Ghost notices the food immediately, but glances toward Ethan before eating. Permission. Ethan nods softly. Go on. This time Ghost eats properly. Slow but hungry now. Watching him finally eat feels strangely emotional. Like witnessing somebody choose life again after standing too close to the edge for too long. Dr. Harris hands Ethan a coffee and sits beside them. He slept nearly 4 straight hours, she says quietly. That is huge. Ethan scratches lightly behind Ghost's ear while the shepherd eats. You think he is strong enough to travel? Depends where. Ethan hesitates briefly. I want to check the church from Claire's message. Dr. Harris studies him carefully over the rim of her coffee cup. You barely know this dog. Ethan looks down at Ghost. Feels like I do. The veterinarian smiles sadly. Funny how that happens sometimes. Morning slowly begins waking the city outside. Rainwater glows silver across the streets, while distant traffic hums back to life beyond the clinic windows. Somewhere nearby, a bakery starts fresh bread for the morning rush. The warm smell drifts faintly through the cold air each time the front doors slide open. Ghost finishes eating and quietly places his head against Ethan's knee. Exhaustion still hangs heavily around him, but something softer lies there now too. Relief maybe. Ethan checks his phone again while Ghost rests against him. No missed calls. No updates. Just the addresses waiting silently on the screen. St. Jude's Church sits only 20 minutes away. You really think Daniel could still be alive? Dr. Harris asks gently. Ethan stares out the rain-streaked window. I think Ghost believes he is. The veterinarian says nothing for a moment. Then quietly, sometimes dogs know things people miss. Around 6 in the morning, Ethan helps Ghost carefully outside into the cold dawn air. New York feels muted after rain. Streets shine beneath pale blue morning light, while steam rises from gutters and subway grates. The city smells like wet concrete, coffee, and ocean salt carried inland by the wind. Ghost pauses beside the clinic entrance and instinctively looks around searching for the station. For the tracks. For Daniel. Then his eyes settle on Ethan instead. Tiny moment, but important somehow. Ethan borrowed an old pickup truck from the clinic mechanic whose shift ended at dawn. The passenger seat has been covered in blankets for Ghost. The shepherd hesitates only briefly before climbing inside beside him. More trust now. Less fear. Ethan starts the engine while soft radio music hums quietly through worn speakers. As they pull onto empty streets, Ghost watches the city pass by through the windows. Every man with gray hair catches his attention. Every military jacket. Every limping figure beneath awnings or bus stops. Ethan notices all of it. You really loved him, did you? He murmurs softly while driving through Midtown. Ghost keeps staring out the window. The morning light catches the old leather collar around his neck. Wait until I come back. Ethan grips the steering wheel tighter. Halfway to Hell's Kitchen, traffic slows near a pedestrian crossing. A homeless veteran stands outside a convenience shop wearing an old camouflage jacket covered in faded service patches. Instantly, Ghost rises upright in the seat despite his injured leg. His breathing quickens sharply. Hope again. Ethan feels it beside him like electricity. The pickup rolls slowly closer. The man turns slightly beneath the traffic light. Wrong face. Wrong eyes. Ghost stares after him anyway as they continue driving forward. Ethan hears the tiny sound the shepherd makes then. Barely audible. Not a bark. Not a whine. Just disappointment escaping quietly from somewhere deep inside him. Ethan swallows hard and looks away toward the road. We are going to find him, he says firmly this time. Ghost turns toward him slowly. Amber eyes tired beyond words. But listening. Believing. Ethan does not know whether he is making a promise to the dog or to himself anymore. 20 minutes later, St. Jude's Church appears at the end of a narrow street in Hell's Kitchen, standing quietly between old brick buildings and dripping jacaranda trees. The church looks forgotten by the city around it. Weathered sandstone walls darkened by years of rain. Wooden doors scarred by time. One stained glass window cracked across the corner like an old wound. Ethan parks slowly along the curb. The moment the engine cuts off, Ghost suddenly stiffens beside him. Completely still. Ears raised high. Not fear this time. Recognition. Ghost is already moving before Ethan fully opens the pickup door. Not fast because of the injured leg, but purposeful. Focused. The shepherd climbs carefully onto the wet street and immediately turns towards St. Jude's Church with ears raised high and body tense beneath the cold morning air. Ethan follows quickly beside him, while Jacaranda leaves drip rainwater onto the pavement around their boots. The church stands silent beneath gray skies, old sandstone darkened from decades of storms and neglect. One of the front steps has cracked nearly through the middle. Rust stains run beneath iron railings. Yet despite the age and weather, somebody still places fresh flowers beside the wooden cross near the entrance every week. Ghost limps toward the doors without hesitation now. The moment they reach the church steps, he stops completely. Ethan watches the shepherd inhale deeply through his nose. Once, twice. Then Ghost lets out the faintest sound Ethan has heard from him so far. Not barking, not crying. Recognition. You know this place, Ethan whispers softly. The shepherd pulls gently toward the entrance. Ethan opens the heavy wooden doors, and warm air carrying candle wax, dust, and old timber rolls over them immediately. Inside, St. Jude's feels untouched by time. Narrow stained glass windows spill pale morning light across worn pews. Tiny candles flicker near the altar despite the early hour. Somewhere deeper in the church, somebody quietly sweeps the floor. Ghost enters slowly beside Ethan. His claws click softly against old stone tiles while his eyes search the shadows between pews with growing intensity. Ethan feels his own heartbeat quicken now, because this is the first place where Ghost does not look lost. This place belongs to memory. A middle-aged priest appears from a side hallway carrying folded linens. The moment he notices Ghost, he freezes completely. "Dear God," he whispers. Ghost instantly moves toward him with cautious urgency. Tail low, ears raised, searching the priest's face desperately. The priest kneels slowly, eyes filling with shock. "Ghost." The shepherd stops inches away, sniffs the man carefully, then slowly backs away again. "Wrong person." The priest's shoulders sink with visible heartbreak. "You are still looking for him, are you?" Ethan steps closer. "You knew Daniel Mercer?" The priest rises quietly. Everyone here knew Daniel. His eyes remain fixed on Ghost. He used to help serve meals every Thursday night. Ethan glances around the empty church. "Have you seen him recently?" The priest's face darkens with concern. "Not since the storm." Ghost suddenly moves past them both down the central aisle toward the altar. Ethan follows quickly. The shepherd limps with more urgency, now despite the pain in his paw. At the front row, Ghost stops beside a small wooden pew near the wall. He stares at it intensely, then slowly lies down beside it. Ethan notices the old blanket folded neatly across the bench seat above him. Army green, worn soft with age. The priest sees Ethan looking. That was Daniel's spot. Ethan feels cold move quietly through his chest. Ghost presses his nose gently against the hanging edge of the blanket, breathing slowly like a man smelling smoke from a burned-down home. "He waited here every week after the shelter meals," the priest says softly. "Said trains were easier than shelters some nights. Too crowded otherwise." Ethan studies the blanket. Did Daniel ever mention why Grand Central mattered so much? The priest nods faintly. It was where he found Ghost again after returning from overseas. Ethan looks up sharply. "Again?" The priest smiles sadly. "Daniel always joked the dog rescued him twice." Silence settles through the church while rainwater taps softly against stained glass. Ghost remains lying beside the old pew now, calmer than Ethan has ever seen him. Like being near Daniel's sin again finally. Eases something hurting deep inside him. "What happened during the storm?" Ethan asks quietly. The priest exhales slowly before answering. "Daniel came here soaked through after midnight. Ghost was with him." Ethan straightens immediately. "You saw them?" "Only briefly." The priest walks slowly toward the altar while remembering. Daniel seemed frightened. More than usual. Of what? He kept saying he needed to get back to Central before morning. Ghost lifts his head instantly at the word Central. The priest notices and lowers his voice gently. Daniel said if anything happened, Ghost would wait there. Ethan's pulse quickens. "Then what?" The priest hesitates. "There was flooding near Hell's Kitchen that night. Roads closed everywhere." He rubs tiredly at his eyes. "I offered them both a room downstairs until morning." Ethan already knows from the priest's expression how the story ends. But Daniel left anyway. The priest nods slowly. Around 4 in the morning. Ghost stands suddenly beside the pew, ears high again. Ethan notices it too late. The shepherd has caught a scent, strong enough to wake every instinct in his body. Ghost limps rapidly toward a side hallway near the back of the church. "Ghost," Ethan calls softly. The shepherd ignores him completely for the first time. Panic and hope drive him forward now. Ethan and the priest hurry after him through narrow corridors lined with old photographs and peeling paint. The hallway leads toward a basement staircase beneath the church. Ghost stops at the top step, breathing hard. His entire body trembles now. Ethan kneels beside him carefully. What is it? Then Ethan smells it too. Damp wool, dust, and beneath it all, the faint, unmistakable scent of another dog owner. Human. Familiar. The priest looks suddenly uneasy. Storage rooms are down there. Ghost begins descending immediately despite the injured paw. Fast now. Desperate. Ethan follows close behind into the dim basement beneath St. Jude's, while weak fluorescent lights buzz overhead. Old furniture lines the walls beneath layers of dust. Cardboard boxes. Soup kitchen supplies. Forgotten belongings from people who never came back to collect them. Ghost moves through the room with frightening certainty now, nose close to the ground. Then suddenly he stops beside a small metal locker near the far wall. Completely still. Ethan approaches slowly. The locker door hangs slightly open. Rust stains the edges. Ghost presses his nose against the crack and whines softly under his breath for the very first time. Ethan gently pulls the locker open wider. Inside sits an old military duffel bag, folded clothes, a flashlight, and a framed photograph of Daniel and Ghost together at Coney Island years earlier. But it is the object resting carefully on top of the bag that makes Ethan's stomach tighten instantly. A train ticket to Grand Central dated the exact night Daniel disappeared. The basement suddenly feels colder after Ethan picks up the train ticket. The paper is damp at the corners from old moisture, but the date remains clear beneath the flickering fluorescent light. 5 weeks earlier, the exact night the storm swallowed half the city in floodwater and chaos. Ghost stands beside him, trembling softly now, nose pressed against the old military duffel bag like he can still smell Daniel there beneath dust and time. Ethan slowly opens the bag. Inside are neatly folded clothes, a shaving kit, 2 tins of dog food, and a weathered notebook tied shut with faded cord. Everything arranged carefully, deliberately, like Daniel intended to come back for it all. The priest kneels beside Ethan quietly. That bag has not moved since the storm. Ethan looks up sharply. Nobody checked it. Daniel valued privacy. The priest's expression darkens with guilt. We thought maybe he had found temporary housing somewhere. Ghost suddenly nudges the notebook with his nose. Once, then again. Ethan unties the cord carefully and opens the worn pages. Most entries are small. Shopping lists, shelter times, weather notes. But farther in, the handwriting changes. Less steady, more tired. Ethan reads silently while the basement hums softly around them. Ghost skipped breakfast again. Pretended he was not hungry, so I would eat first. Bloody idiot does not realize I know him too well for that. Ethan turns another page. The rain outside the church grows heavier again, tapping against basement windows near the ceiling. If anything ever happens to me, Ghost will wait at Central. He always does. That station brought us back together once before. Maybe it will do it again. Ethan's throat tightens slightly. He keeps reading. The final entries become scattered and darker somehow. Harder to follow. Flood warnings tonight. Chest pain worse this week. Must get Ghost somewhere safe before the weather turns ugly. Then one final sentence written shakily across the bottom of the last page. If I do not make it back, tell Ghost I tried. Silence settles heavily through the basement. Ghost rests his head gently against Ethan's shoulder while he stares at the words. The shepherd's breathing feels warm through the fabric of Ethan's shirt. Alive, trusting, waiting for answers Ethan does not know how to give him. Daniel had heart problems. The priest says quietly behind them. Collapsed once during a meal service last winter. Ethan closes the notebook slowly. Why was he homeless? The priest exhales softly. Sometimes pain arrives faster than people can recover from it. He glances toward Ghost. After Daniel's wife passed away, he changed. Stopped answering calls. Stopped trusting people. Ethan nods faintly. He understands isolation too well. Grief has a way of shrinking the world until survival becomes the only routine left. Ghost suddenly lifts his head sharply toward the basement stairs. Ears raised. Body tense. Ethan freezes beside him. Footsteps echo faintly above them through the church floorboards. Slow. Uneven. Ghost stares upward with growing intensity. Hope flashes alive inside him again so fast, it almost hurts to witness. Daniel. Ethan whispers before he can stop himself. The shepherd limps quickly toward the stairs despite the injured paw. Ethan and the priest follow immediately. Their footsteps echo through the narrow stairwell, while Ghost climbs faster than he should, adrenaline overpowering pain completely now. At the top landing, morning light spills weakly through stained glass across the church floor. A figure stands near the entrance beneath dripping umbrellas. Tall, gray beard, worn military coat. Ethan's pulse jumps violently. Ghost lets out a broken sound halfway between a bark and a cry before rushing forward. The man turns quickly. Not Daniel. Older, broader shoulders, wrong eyes. Ghost stops so abruptly he nearly slips across the stone floor. The hope vanishes from his body in real time. Ethan sees the exact second the shepherd understands. Wrong person again. The older man stares down in shock. Ghost. His voice cracks slightly. Ghost studies him carefully for a long moment before slowly lowering his head. Disappointment settles over him like rain soaking through old cloth. The man kneels heavily despite stiff joints. It is me, boy. Tom Bennett. Ghost sniffs his hand politely, but without recognition. Ethan notices that immediately. Whoever Daniel was to this dog, nobody else comes close. Tom looks up at Ethan with wet eyes. Where did you find him? Grand Central. Tom closes his eyes briefly. Of course. They sit together in the church hall while rain drifts steadily outside and volunteers prepare soup in the kitchen nearby. The smell of onions and fresh bread fills the old building with warmth. Ghost lies beside Ethan's chair but keeps watching the church entrance every few minutes. Always checking. Tom wraps rough hands around a mug of tea while studying the shepherd sadly. Daniel and I served together years back. Ethan leans forward slightly. Did he ever mention where he might go during the storm? Tom shakes his head. Only that he needed to get to Central. He glances toward Ghost. That dog saved Daniel overseas once. Ethan looks up sharply. Tom nods slowly. Daniel got trapped during a collapsed checkpoint after an explosion. His eyes drift somewhere far away into memory. Ghost stayed beside him nearly 12 hours until rescue teams arrived. Ethan glances down at the shepherd resting beside him. Suddenly the loyalty makes terrible sense. Some bonds are forged inside survival itself. Tom reaches carefully into his coat pocket and pulls out a folded photograph. Daniel showed me this all the time. Ethan takes it gently. Younger Daniel standing beside Ghost on Lower Manhattan Ferry Terminal at sunset. Healthier then. Smiling. Properly. On the back, handwritten in faded ink, are 6 simple words. We only survive by staying together. Ethan swallows hard. Did Daniel have enemies? Anybody who might know where he went? Tom shakes his head. No enemies. Just ghosts of his own. Silence settles again while rain taps softly against church windows. Then Ghost suddenly rises onto his feet. Every muscle in his body goes rigid. Ethan notices it instantly now. Something changed. The shepherd is not searching randomly this time. He is listening, focused completely toward the street outside. Tom notices too. What is it, boy? Ghost begins moving toward the church doors with growing urgency. Limp forgotten. Ethan stands immediately and follows him into the cold, wet morning. The moment the doors swing open, wind rushes inside, carrying rain and distant traffic noise. Ghost steps onto the pavement and turns sharply toward the train tracks beyond Hell's Kitchen station several streets away. Then he starts pulling forward hard against the lead for the first time since Ethan met him. Not wandering. Tracking. Ghost pulls hard through the wet streets of Hell's Kitchen with a determination that frightens Ethan slightly now. This is different from the restless searching at the station. Different from the hopeful reactions to strangers in crowds. The shepherd is following something real. Rain drifts sideways through the narrow streets while morning traffic begins building around them. Cars hiss across soaked roads. Shop owners unlock shutters beneath faded awnings. Somewhere nearby, somebody plays soft acoustic music through an open cafe door. But Ghost notices none of it. His entire body has narrowed toward one purpose. Ethan struggles to keep pace without pulling against the injured dog. Easy, buddy, he breathes. Ghost ignores him completely. They cross beneath the railway bridge near Hell's Kitchen station where the smell of rust, wet concrete, and train smoke hangs heavy beneath dripping steel beams. Ghost pauses suddenly beside a graffiti-covered wall. His ears twitch sharply. nose lifted into the cold air. Ethan waits silently beside him while commuters hurry past without paying attention. Then, Ghost turns again. Faster now. Down another side street lined with old brick warehouses and shuttered repair shops. Where are you taking me? Ethan whispers softly. The shepherd limps harder now, pushing through obvious pain. Ethan notices the fresh blood beginning to stain the edge of the bandage around the injured paw, but Ghost does not slow down. Hope is carrying him now instead of strength. They reach a narrow alley behind an abandoned textile building where rainwater drips steadily from broken gutters overhead. Ghost suddenly stops so violently that Ethan nearly loses grip on the lead. The shepherd stands frozen, breathing hard, staring ahead into the darkness beneath a collapsed loading awning. Ethan follows his gaze slowly. At first he sees nothing except old pallets and damp cardboard stacked against the wall. Then movement. Very slight. Human. Ghost lets out a low trembling sound unlike anything Ethan has heard from him before. Not fear. Not warning. Recognition breaking open after weeks of silence. Daniel. Ethan calls carefully into the shadows. No answer comes immediately. Only rain tapping softly against metal and distant trains rumbling somewhere beyond the city. Then finally, a weak voice barely louder than breath. Ghost. The shepherd surges forward with sudden, desperate energy. Ethan follows quickly around broken crates and puddles until the figure becomes clear beneath the collapsed awning. A man lies wrapped in old blankets against the brick wall, half sheltered from the rain. Gray beard, hollow cheeks, military jacket soaked from damp air, one arm resting protectively across an old backpack. Daniel Mercer. Alive. Ghost reaches him first. The shepherd collapses beside the man with a sound so full of relief that Ethan feels it physically in his chest. Daniel's shaking hand immediately finds the dog's neck beneath wet fur. You found me, boy, he whispers brokenly. You damn found me. Ghost presses himself against Daniel carefully, trembling from head to tail now. Weeks of waiting finally pouring out through touch alone. Daniel buries his face weakly against the shepherd's neck while tears mix with rainwater in his beard. Ethan stands, frozen nearby for a moment, suddenly feeling like he has stepped into something sacred. Two souls finding each other again after surviving too much loneliness. Daniel slowly looks up toward Ethan through exhausted eyes. Confusion flickers across his face first, then understanding. You are the one who stayed with him. Ethan kneels carefully beside them. Up close, Daniel looks worse than Ethan expected. Pale skin, labored breathing, hands trembling from cold and weakness. But alive. Somehow alive. We have been looking for you, Ethan says quietly. Daniel gives a faint, tired smile. Knew somebody decent would stop eventually. Ghost refuses to leave Daniel's side for even a second now. The shepherd keeps pressing close against him as though terrified he might disappear again if contact breaks. Ethan notices Daniel's hand never stops touching the dog either. Constant reassurance flowing silently between them. What happened? Ethan asks gently. Daniel leans weakly back against the brick wall while rain whispers around the alley. Storm hit harder than expected. His breathing catches painfully for a moment before continuing. Floodwater near the station tunnels. Thought I could make it back to Central before Ghost arrived there. Ethan remembers the notebook. If I do not make it back, tell Ghost I tried. Daniel closes his eyes briefly. Collapsed before I got there. Ghost nudges his face softly at the movement, immediately anxious. Daniel smiles faintly and scratches behind the shepherd's ear with shaking fingers. I know, buddy. I know. Ethan studies the old man carefully now. Why did you stay here? Daniel looks toward the distant railway bridge barely visible through rain. Close enough to hear the trains. His voice breaks slightly. Needed to know he would keep waiting. Ethan feels something twist painfully inside his chest. You thought he would give up eventually? Daniel laughs quietly through exhaustion. Not Ghost. He looks down at the shepherd beside him. That dog stayed beside me under collapsed concrete overseas for nearly half a day. His eyes soften deeply. He does not abandon people. Silence settles gently through the alley while city sounds echo faintly beyond the rain. Ghost slowly places his head across Daniel's chest, listening to the old man's heartbeat like he needs proof it is truly there. Daniel strokes the shepherd's fur weakly over and over again. I tried getting back to him, he whispers. Every day. Ethan notices then how little Daniel actually has beside him. One backpack, 2 blankets, A nearly empty water bottle. That is all. You should be in hospital, Ethan says quietly. Daniel gives him a tired sideways glance. Probably. Ghost immediately lifts his head at the change in tone, watching Daniel closely. Every breath, every movement. Ethan pulls his jacket tighter against the cold rain and looks between them both. Come on, he says gently. Let me help. Daniel starts to answer but stops suddenly, coughing hard into his sleeve. Ghost instantly presses closer, panic flashing through his body again. Ethan reaches forward instinctively to steady the older man. Daniel breathes slowly until the coughing passes, though his face remains pale beneath the rain. Sorry, he mutters quietly. Body is not what it used to be. Ghost looks weakly at Daniel's trembling hand once. Tiny gesture. Pure devotion. Daniel smiles down at him with exhausted affection. You waited anyway, did you? The shepherd presses closer in answer. Ethan looks at them both beneath the broken awning while rain falls softly around the alley like the city itself has gone quiet to witness this moment. Then Daniel says something so softly Ethan almost misses it completely. I kept asking God for one more chance to find him before I died. Ghost lifts his head immediately at the word died and nudges Daniel harder, refusing even the idea of it. Daniel lets out the faintest laugh through tears. All right, buddy. He whispers gently against the shepherd's fur. I am still here. The rain begins easing again as though the city itself is finally breathing easier now that Ghost has found Daniel. Water drips steadily from the broken awning above them, while morning light slowly brightens the alley walls in pale shades of silver and blue. Ghost refuses to move more than a few inches away from Daniel now. Every time the older man shifts or coughs, the shepherd instantly lifts his head, watching him with fierce concentration. Ethan kneels beside them both, one hand resting lightly against Ghost's shoulder while he studies Daniel's exhausted face. Up close, the old soldier looks fragile in a way that has nothing to do with age. Weeks of cold nights, poor food, illness, loneliness. Yet beneath all of it, there is still gentleness in his eyes when he looks at the dog beside him. We need to get you warm, Ethan says quietly. Daniel shakes his head weakly. Ghost first. The shepherd immediately nudges Daniel's chest again as though objecting to the idea entirely. Ethan cannot help the faint smile that touches his face. You two are impossible. Daniel lets out a rough, tired laugh that turns briefly into another cough. Ghost presses closer instantly, nearly climbing into the man's lap despite his size. All right, Daniel whispers softly into damp fur. Still here. Ethan pulls out his phone and calls Dr. Harris from the clinic. While it rings, he watches Ghost settle carefully beside Daniel again, chin resting across the old man's knee like he is guarding something sacred. Dr. Harris answers quickly. Ethan explains everything in low, quiet sentences while rainwater slides through the alley gutters around them. There is a long pause on the other end after he finishes. Then softly, you found them both. Ethan looks down at Ghost and Daniel together beneath the broken awning. Yeah. Another silence. Emotional this time. Bring them in, she says gently. Both of them. 20 minutes later, Ethan helps Daniel slowly into the pickup parked nearby, while Ghost stays pressed against his side every step of the way. The shepherd no longer limps ahead searching crowds or staring at strangers. His attention never leaves Daniel now. Mission complete. The realization hits Ethan unexpectedly hard. Ghost had survived 5 weeks of rain, hunger, pain, and loneliness not because he was waiting blindly. He was keeping a promise alive. Daniel settles carefully into the passenger seat with visible exhaustion. Ghost climbs in immediately afterward and curls against him protectively on the blankets. The moment Daniel's hand touches the shepherd's neck again, Ghost finally exhales deeply for the first time since Ethan met him. Real rest. Ethan drives slowly through wet morning streets while soft sunlight begins breaking through clouds above New York Harbor in the distance. Traffic thickens around them. People hurry toward offices with coffee cups and umbrellas. Nobody notices the miracle sitting quietly inside the old pickup beside them. Daniel watches the city pass through tired eyes while absent-mindedly stroking Ghost's fur. He stopped eating properly after my wife died, he says quietly after a while. Ethan glances over. Ghost. Daniel nods. Would wait beside the front door every night until I came home from hospital. His voice roughens slightly. One night, I realized he was grieving harder than I was. Ghost lifts his head slightly at the softness in Daniel's tone before settling again. Ethan drives in silence for a few moments. He never stopped looking for you. Daniel closes his eyes briefly. That is the problem with loyalty. Rainwater flashes across the windscreen beneath pale sunlight. Sometimes they love us more than we deserve. Ethan grips the steering wheel tighter without meaning to. Those words land somewhere deep inside him. Because he remembers Liam waiting for phone calls Ethan never returned after deployments overseas. Remembers birthdays missed. Promises delayed. Grief has many shapes, but guilt always sounds the same in the quiet parts of the night. You came back, though, Ethan says softly. Daniel looks down at Ghost resting against him. Tried to. The shepherd slowly shifts closer, pressing fully against Daniel's chest now, like he is making absolutely certain the old man cannot disappear again. Ethan catches himself smiling faintly despite the heaviness in his chest. At the clinic, Dr. Harris meets them outside before the pickup fully stops. Her expression softens instantly at the sight through the passenger window. Ghost notices her, but barely reacts this time. Daniel matters more than caution now. Together they help the older man inside, while clinic staff quietly prepare a warm examination room. The moment Daniel sits on the edge of the hospital bed, Ghost lies directly across his boots protectively. Dr. Harris kneels nearby, checking Daniel's pulse and breathing while speaking gently the entire time. You gave everyone quite a scare. Daniel gives a faint, tired smile. Would not be the first time. Ghost watches every movement closely, but remains calm as long as Daniel stays within reach. Ethan leans silently against the doorway, observing them all. Something inside him feels strangely still for the first time in years. Like watching this reunion has repaired a tiny broken piece of his own life too. Dr. Harris eventually straightens with a relieved expression. You are dehydrated, exhausted, and stubborn, she says toward Daniel. But I think you are going to be all right. Ghost immediately lifts his head at the word all right. Daniel scratches gently behind his ears. Hear that, buddy? The shepherd presses closer in response. Ethan quietly steps outside into the corridor while nurses continue checking Daniel over. The clinic hallway smells like antiseptic and coffee. Morning sunlight spills softly across polished floors. For a while he simply stands there listening to the muffled sounds behind the examination room door. Ghost shifting on blankets. Daniel's tired voice. Small ordinary noises that somehow feel holy after so much waiting. Then Dr. Harris steps into the corridor beside him. You did a good thing, she says quietly. Ethan stares through the rain-speckled window at the waking city outside. Honestly feels like the dog did most of the work. She smiles softly. Maybe. Silence settles between them for a moment. Then she asks gently, what happens now? Ethan thinks about the question carefully. Inside the room beyond the door, Ghost finally sleeps properly beside Daniel for the first time in weeks. No twitching. No searching. No listening for footsteps that never came. Just peace. Ethan exhales slowly. I do not know, he admits. But I think neither of them should be alone anymore. Dr. Harris studies him for a second before smiling in quiet understanding. Because sometimes healing begins long before people realize they are part of it too. 3 months later, winter sunlight spills softly across New York Harbor, while ferries cut slow white lines through blue water beneath the morning sky. The city feels warmer now. Cleaner somehow after the storms passed. At Lower Manhattan Ferry Terminal, commuters move through the station with coffee cups and tired conversations drifting into cold air. Most people never notice the old shepherd lying peacefully beside a weathered bench near the ferry terminal. But some do. They stop for a second when they see him. Because there is something deeply calm about Ghost now. No restless scanning. No searching crowds. No desperate waiting at train platforms. Just quiet watchfulness beside the people he trusts. Daniel sits nearby wrapped in a heavy navy coat with a takeout coffee warming his hands. His beard is trimmed shorter now. Color has returned slowly to his face over the past months. Not perfect health. Not miracle recovery. Just survival finally given room to breathe again. Ghost lifts his head the moment Ethan approaches across the terminal, carrying 2 paper bags filled with breakfast rolls. The shepherd's tail taps once against the concrete. Small movement, but Ethan still smiles every time he sees it. Morning, boys. Daniel accepts the coffee with tired gratitude. You are late. Ethan snorts quietly. Traffic. Ghost rises carefully and presses his shoulder briefly against Ethan's leg before settling back beside Daniel again. That tiny movement says more than most people's words ever do. Ethan sits beside them while fairies hum against the docks nearby. The air smells like salt water and fresh bread drifting from cafes opening along the harbor. Around them, the city keeps moving. Busy, loud, human. Yet somehow the small space beside Ghost feels peaceful in a way Ethan has not felt for years. Daniel tears off a piece of breakfast roll and shares it automatically with the shepherd. Same rhythm every time. One bite for him, one for Ghost. Ethan watches quietly before asking, "You heading to the shelter later?" Daniel nods faintly. "Claire needs help sorting donations. I can drive you." Daniel gives him a sideways glance. "You work too much already." Ethan shrugs. "Maybe." The truth is, Ethan barely recognizes his own life anymore. Before Ghost, most evenings ended in silence inside a tiny apartment overlooking Brooklyn Navy Yard. Work, sleep, repeat, surviving without really noticing why. But now there are regular dinners at St. Jude's. Morning calls from Claire. Vet appointments for Ghost. Coffee with Daniel near the harbor. Tiny ordinary things slowly stitching life back together again. Ghost suddenly lifts his head toward a young homeless man sitting alone farther down the terminal with a soaked backpack beside him. The shepherd watches quietly for several seconds before slowly walking over despite the healing paw still wrapped lightly in bandages. The young man looks startled at first. Then Ghost gently rests his head against the stranger's knee. No fear, no hesitation, just recognition of loneliness. Ethan notices Daniel smiling softly beside him. He always does that now. The young man scratches behind Ghost's ears uncertainly before beginning to cry without warning. Quietly, embarrassed by it, Ghost stays beside him anyway. Ethan feels his chest tighten unexpectedly at the sight. Funny thing about broken creatures, Daniel murmurs softly beside him while watching the shepherd comfort the stranger. They recognize each other immediately. Wind drifts across the harbor carrying gull cries and fairy horns through the morning light. Ethan looks toward Ghost again. He saved both of us, did he not? Daniel smiles tiredly. Think maybe he saved more than that. Later that afternoon, Ethan drives them towards St. Jude's in the old pickup that still smells faintly of wet fur and seawater. Ghost rides calmly between them now instead of staring desperately out windows searching crowds. Every so often, he simply checks that Daniel and Ethan are both still there, then rests again. At the church hall, volunteers sort food donations while soft music plays from an old radio near the kitchen. Warm soup fills the building with the smell of garlic and herbs. Claire nearly bursts into tears again the moment Ghost walks through the doors. "Look at you now," she whispers while kneeling to hug him carefully. Ghost accepts the affection with quiet patience before returning immediately to Daniel's side. Some loyalties never change. Ethan helps unload supplies while evening light turns the stained glass windows gold across the old church floor. At some point, he notices a new wooden sign hanging quietly near the entrance beside the meal schedule. For the souls, everyone walks past. Ethan stares at the words for a long moment. Daniel notices from across the room and smiles faintly. Claire's idea. Ethan nods slowly. Somehow those words feel larger than the church itself, larger than the city outside. Because every day people walk past grief, loneliness, hunger, animals shaking in train stations, veterans sleeping beneath bridges, men quietly drowning inside themselves while pretending they are all right. Most people keep moving because stopping hurts. But one person stopping can change the ending completely. As evening settles across St. Jude's, volunteers begin serving meals to people drifting in from cold streets outside. Ghost lies near the doorway watching everyone who enters. Calm, gentle. Occasionally, he rises to greet someone sitting alone too quietly. Sometimes he simply rests his head against their hand for a moment before returning to Daniel again. No searching anymore, only staying. Ethan stands near the kitchen watching the shepherd move softly through the room, like living proof that loyalty can survive almost anything. Daniel walks beside him eventually, slower now, but stronger than before. "You know," the old man says quietly, "I used to think Ghost waited at that station because he could not let go." Ethan glances toward him. And now, Daniel watches the shepherd carefully comfort an elderly woman near the back pews. "Now I think he stayed there because he believed somebody kind would eventually stop." Silence settles warmly between them, while soft church music hums through the hall. Ghost finally returns and lies down between both men near the doorway. One paw touching Daniel's boot, the other resting lightly against Ethan's. Connected. Safe. Home. Outside. Rain begins falling gently across New York again, washing the streets beneath glowing station lights somewhere far. Beyond the church walls, trains continue arriving. People continue rushing past one another through crowds and noise and ordinary sadness. But every now and then, somebody stops. And sometimes, that is enough to save two souls instead of one. If this story stays with you, let it remind you to notice the lonely before the world turns them invisible.